But if you get into that habit, you're always starting to reflect. You're always looking to, how can I improve? What can I do? How good was this? Where was I, struggling with today? And then when you get to the 2K, you're going to have so much more confidence because you've had, let's say, weeks or even months of reflection. You know where your strengths are. You know the areas that you're trying to work on. So there's no real surprises, or at least there shouldn't be surprises. I think if you've done your job right, both as a coach and a rower, you approach a 2K with all of the information you know. I mean, you know how hard you should push yourself. You know how your body's going to react at the 500, the 1,000, the 1,500, at the sprint, because you've practiced all those components. You've thought about it so much that there's no surprises. Yeah, you might go a little bit faster just because the adrenaline's going and you got people yelling at you. So yeah, that's not a bad thing, but you shouldn't be afraid because you don't know what's coming, because you've done so much preparation that there are no surprises.
All right. So for everyone listening, we have Dr. David Schary here, Director of Mental Health and Performance at Winthrop University, back for round 2, actually. And I was just listening this morning to our first conversation, which I think was early part of 2025, diving into just sports psychology, mental performance, and then specifically for rowers, athletes who are trying to navigate the struggles that come with both our sport from a physical and mental side. And David is someone who has really entered himself into the rowing space, working with numerous coaches and athletes, and helping them really on the side that no one sees, but we all know is just as important as the tangible assets that go into rowing performance, like thinking about the intangibles, like the mental performance side. So David, let's kick things off. Let's have some fun. For anyone who is brand new to this, you can learn a lot more about David in our first episode, which we'll put a link to with his intro and start to rowing. But obviously now, where I wanted to really start with you, and I think over the last year, you've really, again, started to make yourself, kind of very known in the rowing space, and visiting, teams and hosting at or presenting at conferences and helping coaches really in this area that I think is very underserved, which is mental performance specifically for rowers. And one of the things as we kick things off, because we're going to talk about 2Ks, we're going to talk about, just how to deal with the mental side of rowing. But in your last year of kind of really going all in on this side of things, I'm just curious to hear from you with the coaches that you've talked to and the number of places that you've been. What are takeaways, trends regarding rowing and mental performance? What are things that you have learned and observed now that as you're more actively in this space, since obviously your coaching days, years ago where you were very active? Now you're bringing this sports psychology lens to a lot of this. What have you learned? What have been your takeaways over the last year?
That's a great question. For me, having talked to now lots of different coaches, mainly in the high school areas, but also at the college level too, is everyone recognizes that mental performance, that the psychology is important to the sport, and that coaches want to address it. And a lot of them do address it in their own ways. But I feel that they don't necessarily have the tools or have been taught how to address it in the same ways that they do all other areas of the sport. I mean, if you think we being rowers are very systematic in what we measure and how we do our training plans, and we measure watts, we measure meters, we're rigging things down to the millimeter. But yet when it comes to the mental side, we recognize it's important, but we don't know how to address it in the same way. And that's really been my big takeaway, is no one says, no, this isn't important, because I think we all see that when we're either a rower ourselves or we're helping our rowers or we're parents of rowers. But it's kind of a mystery. It's like a black box. Well, I have some things that I might have learned from a coach or I saw or I read in a book, but I don't really know how to bring the same sort of systematic training approach that I do to everything else in rowing. So that's really been, I think, the biggest takeaway over this last year, having worked with a lot of different programs and talked to different people. That's been coming back to me.
And I mean, I love that. I think, do you feel like a lot of it is because you're someone who has been in this space for years, and obviously with the work you do down at Winthrop and just helping athletes through the mental side of performance, whether it's in rowing or not. Um, do you feel like it's something that coaches, again, you said like they want to do it or they understand it exists. They understand that there's the mental side of it, but that disconnect between actually learning how to train it in a real kind of a measured way. Like, do you feel like that's something that they just feel uncomfortable or they don't know how to like talk about that, with just coaches in terms of the literal coaching of the mental side of our sport, because I can help an athlete in a conversation learn how to navigate an individual piece or reflect on it, but it's very challenging to kind of get them to realize that in the moment. So that pre-coaching is maybe something that's a little bit way tougher than like the post-coaching, where it's like, oh, you blew up because of strategy or execution, whatever it may be. Like,
Yeah.
just do you feel like that's something that coaches are just they want to learn it, but they just haven't, it's a very challenging topic to necessarily coach and instruct in the same way it is with rowing technique and all that.
Yes, I think that's the biggest thing is that they don't know how to address it in a way that can benefit all athletes. I think they're very good for the most part with that one athlete that might be struggling to, you know, push through whatever boundary or barrier that they're trying to do, and they might work with that one athlete or give a pep talk to another athlete or their whole team. But then they don't really know, well, how do I take the same approach that I might bring to a strength training program or to my threshold training, on the erg in the winter. I don't know how to address the mental training gaps, let's say, in the same way that I would in those. And I think it is more just lack of knowledge of what's important. How do I train it? Is it supposed to be complex? How much time is it supposed to take? What am I supposed to do? I think all of those things kind of get wrapped up in one. And there's just this whole idea of time, like where do I fit it into? Because we're already pressed for time. Let's say if you have 2 hours, with your team, where do I insert it? And when's the most important place to insert it? And I think because of that, we just don't address it. And then there's just the cultural issue of it still being somewhat stigmatized. And, should we actually address it? Are these people just mentally weak and we just need to weed them out? Or they just feel that people should be able to self-motivate? And I think those two issues, not knowing what to do, and then kind of these old school cultural norms kind of go hand in hand and prevent us from actually embracing psychological strategies in the same way we do everything else.
And I think it's easy to say, kind of after a piece again, like what my mind comes to is like the like obviously we're going to talk a lot about 2Ks and 2,000 meter testing, and obviously because
Yep.
that's what's at the forefront of rowing, especially this time of year where erg performance, 2,000 meters, it's January, February, March. A lot of your time is spent on the erg, performing at a very high intensity, learning how to deal with adversity mid-piece and all these different things. And we're going to dive into that, which I'm very excited about. But as I think about mental performance and mental toughness in the sense of learning how to handle what our sport is at its very core, which is point A to point B in the fastest way possible, learning how to endure fatigue for duration, for long periods of time. Like that's our sport at its core. Can you go from A to B as fast as possible? And through that, you have to toe this red line of just taxing and just hard. Like you're maximizing these efforts, and there's the pre and the post to that. But just for starters, like training mental toughness, mental performance, like where do people begin with that? For coaches specifically who are talking to their athletes, like where does that conversation even come up? Where do they even begin? Is it something where they're holding a conversation at the beginning of a practice, being like, hey, this is what I want you to notice and experience and recognize, and just take that wherever you want it. But where do people begin when it comes to training toughness, training performance, mental performance?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question. And I do love the simplicity of our sport. We do just go from A to B as fast as humanly possible. And with that, comes some clarity in that we don't have a lot of strategy in the same way, football or basketball does. We have technique, obviously, and we try to perfect that. But from the mental standpoint, it really zones in then on the core elements of things that people usually struggle with. And, pushing themselves, kind of having this toughness, I think is one of them. Confidence, which is closely related, is another. And then trying to motivate yourself to actually wake up every day and do these hard practices are usually the three big things. And so when we think of mental toughness and where do we even start with training mental toughness, if I'm a coach or even if I'm a rower, like how do I even do that? We don't have to overcomplicate it. Usually I just start with getting to know your athletes first. They need to understand where are they right now and where do they struggle. So a lot of it comes back to simple reflection. That's almost where I always start with coaches and athletes is we need to know where we're at right now. And there's assessments and things, but as a coach, you don't have to mess with that. I think it can be very easy at the end of these hard pieces. If you do a 2K or just doing a hard training day on the erg, you could just have them answer a series of questions after they're done. And it doesn't have to be very hard. It can, there's several different versions that'll suggest, one can just be, what was a good thing that happened? What was something that challenging that happened? And then what can I do better next time? Another set of questions that might pinpoint a little bit more into this toughness and pushing yourself through pain specifically would be, okay, where did my brain tell me that I needed to stop? Because if we're doing a 2K, let's say, there's probably a point in time where, our brain's telling us that we can't keep going. And usually we have to learn to kind of push past that. Okay, well, where did that initial alarm go off? And then kind of question two is, did I listen to that alarm? How far was I able to push past that? Was I able to complete the piece? Was I able to just go an extra 100 meters, whatever it was? Because that gap starts to tell us, I guess, where our mental toughness is in that, where did my brain tell me to stop and how far was I willing to push? To me, that's a very simple measurement of, I guess, mental toughness. And then finally, the third question was, okay, well, what does that gap tell me about my own brain? Well, it usually tells you that you have more to give than what your brain's telling you. Almost everybody can push past, even if it's 10 meters, one stroke past where their brain tells them to stop. Well, if you can notice that and okay, well, my brain's obviously sending an alarm earlier than necessary, so I have more physically to give. Well, the more I can start recognizing that, the more I can start building that gap and the more I can start extending it. And so if we as coaches or as people working with rowers, they can do it themselves as well, just at the end of the pieces, was I able to push myself? Okay, what does that tell me? Because that reflection, while it might seem simple or almost unnecessary, that's really where the learning happens. And, if people are unconvinced, I usually ask them, when you read something new, you might think you understand it until you go to explain it to somebody or when you write it down and then you realize, oh, I don't really know it. And you stumble over your words and it takes you a few times to really get it. Well, that's your brain putting the information together so you can actually learn it and store it in long-term memory and actually change the way you think. That's what reflection does. It notices something that might be obvious to us, but then we're able to conceptualize it, put it in our own words, and that is where the learning happens, and that's where we're able to digest it and make changes. So long story short, start with reflection. And what I also love about it, not only is it simple, but it doesn't take a lot of time. It takes a couple minutes at the most. Maybe you get some clipboards. I sometimes just have athletes grab their phones, open up a notes app, just type it in. They can talk to each other. Just something that gets them vocalizing or writing what they felt, why they think they felt that way, and what does it tell them about themselves. It's the simplest way to start. And you'll see just from that alone, athletes will start to grow and start to change.
I think what I love about, there's the what you can actually do tangibly that help you become more aware of the areas that you're struggling with in the moment, in different moments throughout an erg test. In many ways, when you're messaging that, out of curiosity, I think, okay, writing it down, reflecting on it. What are the pain points? What are you experiencing? What are you thinking about? That's we can tell athletes to do that. We can tell them to write these down and reflect on them and all these different things. I think it's another thing to actually get them to truly absorb it in the moment next, in the next piece. Talk about that a little bit. Whereas, is it really okay, well, if you experienced this, right? You're 800 meters in and you start to fall off, your goal's pace, and then the whole thing unravels in the second half. I was just having this conversation with an athlete yesterday
Mhm.
morning, regarding their first 2K of 2026. They got 750 meters in, and the whole thing started to fall apart. And to me, that comes very much so to execution, learning how to actually execute the piece well and trusting your numbers and knowing exactly what you should be holding as a sustainable piece, knowing who you are as an athlete. How do you handle the middle, and are you actually setting yourself up to be able to succeed there? But then there's, okay, well, if that were to happen again, how do you handle it better next time? And you can
Yeah.
write it down, you can reflect on it, but really what's the next thing that people need to do? Well, they got to kind of uh, go out and do it again, right? And
Yeah.
experience it, right? And talk about that, like actually getting it to absorb for coaches, because they can say, let's write down and reflect on it. But as it from a team environment, most of them are going to go out and they're probably going to do the exact same thing. At least many of them,
Yeah.
right? They're going to hit
Yeah.
they're going to hit the wall.
Yeah.
But like you
Yeah.
said, they might get that 50 meters further before it
Mhm.
happens, which is a progress, but they have trouble seeing that progress, right? They're like, well, I still blew up, right? I was trying to break 7 and I was at, 143s. And the next thing you know, I went at this time it was 900. Last time it was 850, but I still blew up, right? And it didn't happen.
Mhm.
Talk about like actually getting it to absorb with athletes. Again, take that wherever you want, but talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think before we can actually get it to absorbing it, I think it's taking a step back and how we conceptualize mental training in general. Because I think one of my big goals I have learned is to convince rowers, athletes, coaches that mental training operates on the same timeline as strength training or fitness training does. We wouldn't expect a rower who, let's say, is struggling with their strength or their power to go to the weight room, do a set of squats, and then tomorrow, magically, they're going to have so much more power and they're going to be so much more stronger. Because we know our body takes time to adapt. It's going to take months of a systematic program with the proper recovery and logging and doing all that stuff. And hopefully, 3 or 4 months down the road, we see those big strength gains and the big power gains. We need to adopt that same mindset to the mental side, because often I'll get called in when, the house is on fire. I'm hitting this wall, I can't do it, I've tried everything else. Okay, now let's bring in somebody. And then they expect overnight after one session or one reflection session that, okay, I'm going to be able to push through the wall. Well, that's just not how it works. Our brain doesn't work any differently than our quadriceps do. So we need to be able to come in with that understanding. Okay, so if we come in with that understanding, we know that it takes time. Well, then we know, okay, when we reflect, that's step one. Well, then when we do the next hard piece, we have to be reminded of whatever it is that we wrote down. And so it's whether it's just a verbal cue from the coach of, hey, what were the couple things you wrote down? What did you write for your next focus? Kind of prime that so it's there. Because again, if you're working with high schoolers, working with college athletes, heck, if you're even working with senior team athletes that are in their 20s and 30s, everybody might need to be reminded just because it's new, especially if this is a new thing. So we remind them, okay, what's the focus? What are you trying to do? And then if they do have those small, victories of maybe they push themselves 50 more meters, 100 more meters, we need to be able to celebrate that. I mean, not celebrate that they still, let's say, crashed out, but be able to celebrate and point out, hey, you made progress. Just like if in the weight room, they were able to put on an extra 10 pounds on both sides for their squat, hey, that's progress. It's not maybe where we want to be in 2 or 3 months, but it's better than we were last week. So be able to mirror that and be able to then remind athletes of progress and remind them of what their strategies are, I think is the next step. And then over time, we start building those successes. So it's 50 meters, today, maybe next week now it's 100 meters. Maybe the next week it's 150 meters. And it's not going to be linear all the time. It's not always going to be stacking perfectly in that way. But over time, if we were to zoom out long enough, we see that linear progress.
And for out of curiosity, for when you're going about, I have so many questions that I think would be
Of
fun to,
course.
to talk about. But
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
I think one of them first is, it's like, I think number one, like when we talk about there's the 2K as kind of like the number that we all kind of gravitate to, and we see it's the
Yes.
surface level number that we, whether it's for selection or recruiting, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that you said, like you're not going to just, um, do a push up and next thing you know, like your bench press went up, 100 pounds. Like it takes
Hmm.
a consistent amount of effort and real work to elicit that response and get that result. Well, it's the same thing on the mental performance side. And do you look at this as a test day practice and a test day reflection, or do you look at it as a daily reflection process and reflection? Meaning, like, hey, if you're coaching a team, there should be elements of this in steady states and water sessions, and we'll stay mostly to the erg and winter since that's the time of year that we're in like a 5 by 1500 with 5 minutes rest in between. Like, is this something that we should only be talking about? And I think I know the answer to this, but like, is this something we should only be talking about on 2K day, or is this something where you're going to notice trends in all training that then make themselves known in a higher capacity on test day? Okay, well,
Yeah.
you have to learn how to manage all training days so that your body knows how to absorb that better on test day. If all you do is think about mental performance on test day, well, the marginal gain is going to be much smaller because you're only testing, a couple times a month, right? If that.
Hmm.
Talk about that, like daily practice of this as a coach to their athletes or as an athlete individually versus now we have a 2K coming up this week. I might as well think about mental performance a little bit. Talk about
Right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you are waiting to till 2K test day, that's too late because really you're not going to make any sort of meaningful change in that amount of time. There's might be a couple things you can do, maybe, but in general, it is the lead up to the testing day that really counts. So I'm of the opinion that we should always be reflecting after every practice. The questions might change because if you're just doing a long steady state, hopefully you're not going to get to the point where, that alarm's going off in your mind of, oh, I need to stop, I need to stop. You might get tired, but it's not the same sort of fatigue that you would feel in a 2K or a, 5 by 1500 meter type piece. So that might be more of a reflection of, okay, what's something that I did right? What's something I want to work on? What can I do tomorrow? Just a very simple reflection, something like that. Whereas if you're doing those harder pieces that are pushing the threshold, that are really training you for the 2K type work, that's when you would then mirror the same reflection that you would do at the end of a 2K. So you put those two together, you're always doing reflection. You're training your rowers to have this kind of metacognitive view of themselves. So they're always not questioning what they can do, but they're always thinking about, okay, how was that? How am I doing? And when you're doing steady state, you can even be doing that as you're rowing. You kind of have that mental capacity because you're not pushing yourself so hard. You can be thinking like, okay, is this going according to plan? What can I focus on? You don't have to be quite as narrowed in your thinking as you do in 2K or sprint pieces. But if you get into that habit, you're always starting to reflect. You're always looking to, how can I improve? What can I do? How good was this? Where was I, struggling with today? And then when you get to the 2K, you're going to have so much more confidence because you've had, let's say, weeks or even months of reflection. You know where your strengths are. You know the areas that you're trying to work on. So there's no real surprises, or at least there shouldn't be surprises. I think if you've done your job right, both as a coach and a rower, you approach a 2K with all of the information you know. I mean, you know how hard you should push yourself. You know how your body's going to react at the 500, the 1,000, the 1,500, at the sprint, because you've practiced all those components. You've thought about it so much that there's no surprises. Yeah, you might go a little bit faster just because the adrenaline's going and you got people yelling at you. So yeah, that's not a bad thing, but you shouldn't be afraid because you don't know what's coming, because you've done so much preparation that there are no surprises.
I love that, and I think just there's mental falling victim to the doubt and and mental performance because it seems it seems to be something that you are really struggling with, and you've been rowing for a long time. You know your body well. You know how to train. You train this side of things daily in your practices and things like that. You reflect on it, and you just can't get over that hump, which I want to talk about here in a second.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's just you misfire execution because you weren't you're not aware enough of who you are as an athlete to know that, okay, well, if you've never broken 8 minutes, you probably shouldn't go out at 7:20 pace. Like that's
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
misfire, and like you're gonna you can use, mental performance as kind of like an excuse or something to lean on, but in reality, it's a misfire of execution. So it's like you have to your point, put yourself in these situations and reflect on them throughout the course of your training so that you are so in tune with your body on the day of test day where you are not surprised. There are no surprises because the, then like, okay, well, when I'm going through this process, it is purely an execution, or it is purely for some reason, I just can't get through that little mental block that I experienced from, 800 in to, 800 to go. And I want to talk about that here. I think this is going to be a fun conversation that dovetails into a bunch of other things. But you referenced the alarm a couple of times, the alarm that goes off in our mind, and just talk about that. Talk about the like what happens in our brain when we are going through a hard effort, 2,000 meters, and we're 800 meters in, or we have 800 meters to go. That alarm goes off. Let's talk about what that is, what's happening, and then maybe we can talk about how do we manage it? How do we redirect it? So explain that, right? Like what's happening 1,200 meters in, or 800 meters in, whatever it is, whenever that moment hits where the feeling of I'm never going to get to this finish line and I'm going to completely fall off the rails. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, and this is fascinating to me. And before we get to 1,200, let's start at the beginning. Well, actually, let's start before the beginning. I think it's important to know that our minds have kind of these like two types of systems. We have system one and system two. I call them racing brain and training brain. But essentially, what this means is we have two types of thinking. We have like our very immediate, intuitive, fast type thinking. It's kind of at the very center of our brain, and it's very emotional driven and sometimes very unconscious. And then we have this system two thinking, which I call training brain. That's much more of our prefrontal cortex. For the science nerds out there, it's really like the big part of the brain right here. That's where we have our reasoning, we have our memory, all the executive function type planning type things are all there. All right, so when we are, I don't know, living our lives 99% of the time, we are in this kind of training brain type mentality. We're not really stressed all that much. We can think clearly, we have plans. And so when we start a 2K, that's really where we're at. We can think clearly, we know what our strategy is, we know what, splits we want to hit. All well and good. Okay, well, as we start the 2K, the first 500 meters or so, that's kind of the dominant thinking. Things feel really good. But as we shift later into the piece, it gets harder. We start hurting a little bit more physiologically. We get more worked up. Heart rate goes up, breathing intensifies. Our body's kind of being flooded with these hormones and chemicals. And we're going to switch from that nice training brain that's very logical and we know what we should do to the racing brain that is not logical. It's very irrational. And that's kind of where the fight or flight mentality can come into. With this, it's also important to realize that we have a lag in what is happening to our bodies and what our mind can process. This is why the first 500 meters can feel really easy, even though you're pushing yourself physiologically very hard. Like if you had yourself all connected to everything, you would see that physiologically you're working very hard. But there's a lag time in your brain being able to process that. So it's not till about 500 meters or so until we start processing what we're actually putting our body through. That's why first 500 meters can feel great. And then all of a sudden you kind of hit that wall and it's harder to maintain that split. And it's going to be hard from then on. That's the mind kind of catching up to what the body's been doing. All right, so once we do that, we're shifting now more towards that racing brain, very intuitive. We're not really rational at that point, and our memory and all of that is kind of going offline. It's not really dominant. We start becoming more rigid and more focused, and that's when we start getting to the point where, can I keep doing this? And if we have paced ourselves well, physiologically, you should be able to do it. Because again, we just started saying like you should have been doing all this training. You should know exactly what you can hold. So if you know that these are splits you should be able to hold, you know that you're well rested, all of these things are aligned. All right, then we can probably make a good educated guess that what we're experiencing then is psychological. It's not physical. We know our body can do it. Everything's lined up. So we need to start thinking, okay, well, what can I do? Well, we need to uh, not overcomplicate things. So we might start saying, oh my goodness, like, can I do this? We start thinking about, or we try to start thinking about what our strategy is, but we can't do that very well because that executive functioning is not online. So we have a tendency then to catastrophize, like, oh my goodness, can I do this? I don't know if I can do this. You're kind of in this fight or flight mode, so you're not really thinking clearly, and things just can very much unravel very quickly. What can we do then to prevent that from happening? We want to break things up first into smaller chunks. The 2K is usually broken up by 500-meter chunks, but that can even be too intimidating for some people. It'd be too threatening. Like, oh my goodness, how can I maintain this for another 800 meters, 900 meters? That's just, oh my goodness. So we break it up then into smaller chunks. Maybe it's 100-meter chunks. Maybe we just count strokes. Maybe we're just somehow finding a block that is small enough for us to be able to focus on without getting overwhelmed. And then within each block, we have an external focus. So we don't want to focus on how much, pain we might be feeling or what our heart rate feels like or anything like that. We want to focus outwardly. So maybe it's, sitting up straight. Maybe it's pulling in. Maybe it's feeling my feet push off. Maybe it's even looking at what my stroke rate is. Whatever it might be, taking deep breaths. I have an external focus for that set period of time. For 100 meters, I'm just going to focus on pulling in. That then keeps our mind occupied, and it's going to decrease that level of intensity because we're no longer going to be, just obsessing over how we feel or how much our legs hurt. Then if we have cues lined up, we just kind of rotate through them. We don't want a laundry list because, again, we can't really think that clearly in this state. So we don't want a laundry list. We want it very simple, maybe 3 or 4 things. We have it broken up. I've seen rowers kind of write it down on a Post-it note and like tape it to their erg monitor or put it on the wall. Or if they're working with a coxswain or they're coxing their friend, they can tell them, and they just kind of constantly rotate through whatever their 3 or 4 things are. It's not going to make it any easier. It's not going to feel easier physiologically. It's going to still tax you, and it's not trying to make it easier, but it's going to help your mind stay focused on things that matter instead of just wrestling with, oh my goodness, I shouldn't feel this way. Oh my goodness, what's my split? No, we have these set things, and we're not going to deviate from them. Kind of a long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
No, I love it, and I want to keep going. Is one of the things I like to tell athletes is first half training, second half racing. So it's like the first half of the 2K, again, if we're using 2K as an example, but this could be 5K, this could be 30 minutes, this could be a 5x5 minute hard workout on a Saturday morning, like could be anything. But one of the things I always like to tell athletes is first half training, second half racing. Like the first half, you should know 99.9 times out of 99.9% of the time, you should be able to get to the 1,000-meter mark, if you have a well executed game plan. Mm-hmm. If that is that 0.1% of the time where it doesn't happen, well, then that could be any number of things. It could be a bad day, whatever. It could be the mental side. If you notice that, almost every time you go to do a test, you are struggling to get to that 1,000-meter mark. Okay, well, that's probably execution. Or it's mental, right? There's some kind of mental block that's telling you that this is, like that where you start to fall apart before you even get halfway through, right? That first half should be training. The second half is where the race begins, right? Where we're kind of like you're highlighting. And I think in many ways that comes to the expectation that we place on our shoulders and the false predictability that we kind of think we have in our mind about how, can we hold this to the second, through the second half. All those different things start to creep into our mind. And my question to you is it the goal in many ways to almost delay when that racing brain kicks on, where in the first, we want to stay in that training state in many ways, like for the first half, because, you want to be in a space where you have clarity, direction, game plan, you're executing well. Then the racing side of it, which I guess can be a good thing and a bad thing, you almost want to delay when that arises, whether it's 800 or 1,200. At some point, it's going to come because 2Ks stink. They're hard, right? They're supposed to be, right? If they're not hard, you're not doing it right. the question is, are you kind of trying to almost defer that to the second half or defer that to the 1,000? And if you start to experience it too early, how do we wrestle with that? How do we manage that? Which you kind of said there's many cues and things like that. But again, is the goal to
Yeah.
almost delay when that racing brain takes over for that training brain?
I wouldn't say so much that the goal is to delay it. It's more to make it so the alarm, let's say that goes off, isn't a command to, you have to stop. Like this is not good. And more to just almost like a low level warning of, okay, we're pushing where we're supposed to be pushing. So it's no longer this I'm in fight or flight. It's much more of, okay, I'm actually pushing the way I should be pushing. So the alarm isn't as loud, doesn't go off maybe as early. If you have a higher level of fitness, you can push a little bit harder for a little bit longer. But I think it's more of trying to reinterpret what it means when we start feeling fatigued and we start feeling tired. And we want to start realizing that you have more to push after that initial shock from your brain that says you don't have anything more. Because your brain, I mean, that kind of system one at that point, its whole purpose is to try and, keep you alive and to keep you safe. So it's just doing what it was designed to do. And when we're doing a 2K, it doesn't know that you are doing something voluntarily that's just really hard and taxing. It just feels this quick acceleration from doing nothing to doing something very intense. And to that, it's kind of blind to the circumstance. So it sees, oh my goodness, we're doing something really intense. This isn't good. We need to shut this down. I need to send signals to say, hey, we need to slow down. But if we can train ourselves to understand, hey, I can keep doing this. I do actually have more left in the tank. Then we start to almost unconsciously be able to know that, hey, I can keep pushing. And then if we reflect on that at the end of the piece is, hey, that alarm went off at 700 meters, but I was able to actually push through almost the whole thing. We reflect on that. We kind of make note of it. Our brain starts to change and it starts saying, okay, that alarm's still going to go off, but now it's not so much a command. It's much more of, oh yeah, this is what it's supposed to feel like. And I still can push myself because I know I have the fitness. I know I have the technique, whatever it is. And you cannot so much ignore the alarm, but it doesn't hold the same impact as it does before. Yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's fascinating because like again, like the brain is gonna you're gonna enter this survival state at some point where
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be everything's going to be creeping in and telling you that you can't sustain this, that this is you have to you're trying to sustain this for another 4 or 5 minutes, like you physically can't, like stop, slow down, your brain is constantly telling you that, but the whole purpose of what we do to try to kind of seek breakthroughs is to toe that line and put ourselves in those situations where we can learn how to endure that.
Yeah.
And I think like that's one of the big things where like getting athletes to kind of experience that and learn, like, how do you kind of, again, you referenced it before, but just revisit it. Just like, okay, well, when you're in those situations, I like to use the one that you talked about where it's like chunking, where it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm going to break it up. I like to kind of say like, hey, first 1,000 is 500, 500. Third 500 is 250, 250. Last 500 is 500, 500, 500, 500. Right? Like
Yeah.
you're trying to learn how to chunk it up and only focus on that next thing on the horizon, which is
Mm-hmm.
getting to the 500, getting to the 1,000, getting to 750, getting to 500 to go. Right? Like, if you're messaging this to your team, like how are we supposed to coach large masses of athletes, meaning like 8 to 25 to 30
Yeah.
athletes, coaching them to recognize this and be able to tolerate that feeling in the middle and making themselves aware of that. Like just take that wherever you want, but like how do we coach that? Like if I'm a coach, like how do we even like be
What do you
proactive in
do?
doing that? Is that chatting on the whiteboard and like kind of, hey, here's how we should be thinking, like this, like just take that wherever you want. But I know you talk to a lot of coaches. How
Yeah.
do they
I
help
mean,
manage their teams?
yeah, it starts by planning this out. Your rowers need to understand, where do they usually hit that wall? And even if they've never done a 2K before, hopefully they've done hard pieces before they sit down to do a 2K. So they know eventually, about this time, this is what I feel. this is what it feels like. This is what my mind says. So, and if all going well, they've done reflection well up to this. So they're already kind of in that cycle of this is what I do. This is how I might be able to push myself. So prior to the 2K, I like to do it at least a day in advance. So it's not, 5 minutes before. So at least the practice before the actual 2K, you have the rowers start to plan out, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on. This is how I'm going to break it up. And whether you want to have a team-wide strategy of, the first 1,000, 500, 500, whatever, like that's fine. If you want to leave it up to the rowers, that's okay too. If you want to give more guidance to your novices and kind of let your more experienced rowers do their own thing, great. What you know your rowers best, but I think you need to have some sort of plan, and they need to know, okay, how am I going to chunk it up? What am I going to focus on in each of those chunks? Making sure that it's not too complicated, that it's very simple, and that it's much more externally focused, because we don't want to be focused on what's going on inside. We want those external cues. And if we can do those things and it's planned out, and if you don't trust your rowers to remember, then I would say have them write it down, get a Post-it, a note card, whatever it is, and have them put it where they can see it when they're actually doing the test, because then they can remind themselves, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm focusing on. Second 500 meters, this is my word that I'm telling myself. Then those are the things that can help them get through those tough, second half parts of the race, because they don't have to consciously remember, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to be focusing on again? No, it's right there in front of me.
I love that. I think, again, I think this is so interesting, especially for like large groups of athletes,
Yeah.
younger athletes, experienced athletes, you name it, but like learning how to be able to handle that. I think one of the things that I observe a lot with working with high school athletes on an more individual basis than from a team standpoint is, and we talked about this a little bit in our last conversation, but like it's almost like setting ourselves up for failure before we even begin a 2K. And what I mean by that is I talk about this a lot, with athletes or on solo episodes and all that, where it's just the expectation that comes in and how that expectation leads to almost, a added layer of weight on our shoulders, or a significant layer of weight on our shoulders, where when we go about a 2K test, what we should be able to hold 99.9% of the time, we struggle to hold every time, because the moment that doubt creeps in, 750 meters to go, we completely unravel. And I want you to just like talk about that, like almost like 2K as an identity, right? Like we kind of get wrapped up in 2K in 2,000 meter testing because we're sending it to college coaches. We are using it for selection. We are doing all these different things. It's the piece that is the number that our teammates are bragging about around the boathouse. We put all this extra weight on the 2K. And then when we go about that process, the moment adversity hits, because of all that extra weight, in many ways, we become more fragile in those moments. And that's where we unravel. Talk about just that side of things in the sense of like the expectation, the attachment of a 2K to identity, and how that may impact the athletes who are sophomores, juniors, seniors, who really want to do this at the highest level, go off and row in college. Just talk about that for a minute. We talked about it a little bit last time, but I think it's such a powerful, like important thing to think about in releasing yourself from a lot of that extra weight to be able to perform with clarity.
Yeah, no, it is. And we being like the rowing community has built up the 2K into something much bigger than it is. I mean, a 2K for most people isn't just another workout or just, 2,000 meters. It holds so much more. It represents, or it could represent, a rower's status on the team. It could represent if they get recruited or not, or if they're selected for what boat. So we attach so much more to the 2K than just the raw score or just having it be another workout. And I love what Kit Bennett and, his team at Skyline, shout out to them. They always say before a 2K, this is just another data point. It's just another workout. There's nothing inherently special about the 2K. It just is a marker of this is where I'm at this point in time. And again, everything going well, it should be not a surprise what you get. If this is your first 2K, it's probably going to be a little bit different. But if you've done 2Ks a lot, shouldn't be a surprise. But we, as a rowing community, put more status or more baggage onto it than we really should. So I think culture wise, we need to shift much more to this is just a data point. This is just one thing among many. I feel that college coaches, I understand why they use 2Ks so heavily. It's kind of like why do you use GPA or SAT scores, in college admissions so much. But I think we need to de-emphasize that because I think it doesn't necessarily show or reflect maybe the full potential of a rower. But with that being said, me and you may not be able to do that ourselves. So we live in a world where there is a lot of status around it. And so I think rowers themselves then have to start changing the story that they tell themselves about a 2K. Because again, it's not the workout, it's a story we're telling about the 2K that is causing all of this pressure. So rowers themselves can change that inner narrative. They can just start saying, hey, this is another workout. This is just a marker of what I need to do. There's nothing inherently special about this. I just did something that was way harder than a 2K last week. If you're doing a 5 by 1500 meters or whatever workout you had stated earlier, like to me, that's a way more intimidating than just a 2000 meter piece that's over, 6, 7, 8 minutes. And so I think we as rowers in a rowing community need to reframe what a 2K is. And the more we reframe that, the less power it has over us. But even if we do have that stuck in our mind of all this pressure, or you do have a coach that really puts a lot of emphasis on it and you can't escape it, it's not so much trying to battle that or wish it wasn't there. It's just acknowledging, yeah, I have these thoughts. It's okay to have these thoughts. It's okay to feel a little nervous. I can still execute. I can almost guarantee that, an Olympic rower sitting in the gold medal final is going to feel nervous and is going to have anxiety because of that. That's okay. They don't have to then let that anxiety affect what they focus on. And that's why I like to externalize the focus and have these set chunks and set things that we can turn our attention to, plan prior to, because then you're not at the mercy of how you feel at that particular time. You've already thought it through. And so regardless of how you feel, you can sit down, you can still execute, and you know exactly what you're going to execute, and you know exactly what you're going to think about.
And you kind of like, I think one of the things that I think is fascinating about that, like, and we do our winter training group in the garage, and like we had 10 athletes this past winter, and that just wrapped up last week, and we did some 2Ks and stuff like that. And one of the things I always tell them is like, this is the most fail-free zone you're ever going to be in. Like, I'm not, broadcasting that we're doing 2Ks. I'm not firing these off to your high school coaches. I'm not sending them to college coaches and all this. Like, you have this ability to just go about the process, treat it like any other workout, treat it like any other test. And again, when you come back to first half training, second half racing, right? I got to kind of earn that second half by being smart in the first half. You're putting yourself in a position where actually you can shock yourself and actually, have that big PR. You attacked it in the second half and you released yourself from expectation in the first half. And it's amazing how that works. And then kind of to your point, like for high school coaches to be able to message that to their athletes, in many ways, you're actually, you're taking that stress off of just this one number, because if you don't, internally, they're going to put put it on this pedestal of something completely separate than any other workout that they do. Talk about I think one of the things that I think, what could athletes and what could coaches do to help athletes with the lead up to 2Ks? Again, like not just the physical day itself, but in the sense of like getting them to kind of disconnect from it being so ingrained in their identity as an athlete. Like, and this could be a long-term thing and all these different things, but like, what are actionable things that athletes can do to kind of treat it like any other test, or treat it with a little bit more mental clarity, or have a little bit more mental clarity surrounding it, and separate themselves from, because what I think, actually, last thing, what I think they do is they enter the piece in racing mode, right? To use your, right? They enter the piece in racing mode. So they are already in that reactive state, and versus, the training mode, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you have this time to kind of build into it, and then right,
Hmm.
like what can athletes do to kind of release themselves of that pressures and expectations and everything that surrounds high performance in rowing?
Yeah, I think again it goes back to what I was just saying of changing the story around what a 2K is. So coaches can do this, I think, very easily within their teams of, kind of treating it just another data point, really making that explicitly clear to their athletes, but then they can't say that and then go around and all of a sudden rank all their kids by 2K score and, do all this because the actions are going to speak much louder than those words and then they're not going to believe you. So if you are going to say this is just another data point, there's nothing wrong with then collecting the data and all that, but then how do you present that to your athletes? Is it just another one of a lot of measures that you're collecting and that you're ranking people on and all that? Because we can't get away from rank. I mean, our sport is kind of based around that. So I'm not trying to say we shouldn't rank or that we shouldn't use the data or that you shouldn't, you know, uh, take what their scores are. But how are you using that? And how are you framing it? So I would recommend just framing it as a marker of where are you and are you progressing in ways that you should. And it's not even that we should maybe take away some of the hype around 2Ks because I do think that there is something for training yourself to handle more high anxiety moments. Because again, if you find yourself at a grand final at whatever your big regatta or championship is, you want to be able to know that you can feel that way and still perform. So I think that there is something to say that, yeah, let's put a little pressure on some of these pieces. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But at the same time, we don't want to have just this one workout holding so much weight around identity and selection. I think if it's part of a larger process, yeah, we use 2K in addition to seat racing, in addition to these other fitness testing, in addition to just what I observe as a coach, then me as a rower, I'm not going to be feeling as pressured that one bad 2K is going to tank my ability to make whatever boat or to be able to race in whatever championship. So I think it's how we use the data will um, will speak volumes to our rowers, and then rowers, what stories we're telling ourselves about this, and if we can see it more long term, long range development rather than just I am whatever my 2K score is on this day.
That you just reminded me of in our first conversation. If you're a coach that talks about an open door policy and coming to me with anything, and
Remember that?
coming to me and being comfortable, like talking about whatever concerns are going on with you and on the mental side and family
Yep.
situations and all these different things. But they come to you and you need a few days off, and you say like, hey, I got to get my head right. I need a few days off. But then they return and all of a sudden they're not in the same boat, or they're
Mm-hmm.
being treated differently. That's kind of similar, where it's like if you and I am a person who loves to a lot of what we do is focused around 2K performance and trying to maximize those results and all these different things. Like there's I don't want to hide from that side of things. But if you're a coach who says this is just a data point, but then you're publishing a ranking and everything is kind of front and center. I think the messaging around that, like how do you kind of message that in a way that you're not kind of speaking out two different ways, right? You're actually like, okay, well, this is just a data point. This is just an added layer to our overall training program.
Mm-hmm.
We use these rankings for a reason, to be able to measure and see and track progress. But even then, this shouldn't be your identity wrapped up in just this number. So I think like
Right. Yeah.
that, yeah. So I think like that's the thing that a lot of coaches can learn how to navigate, because there is something valuable to, you know, seeing where your team stacks up and seeing how athletes are competing. We are a numbers based sport. We do have to learn, to your point, how to compete in high anxiety moments. But how do you message that in a way where athletes can still keep that longer term clarity, where not everything is wrapped up in PR or bust and all these different things. Does that
Right.
make
Well,
sense?
and it does. And it also saves us from the temptation of just saying, oh, well, this person has a really good erg score. They should automatically be in the best boat, which is always a temptation. And yes, there's probably a very high correlation to whatever your 2K score is and what boat you're in. But there's always that idea of like, well, I posted this high 2K score. Why am I not in that boat? Well, if all of our emphasis has been on what are you pulling on the erg, that's a really hard argument to defend. But if you are saying as a coach, hey, this is just one of many things that we look at, well, then it just becomes one of many things. And you don't have to defend, oh my goodness, well, just because you're the top erg scorer doesn't mean that you automatically get into this and this boat.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. That's a good way to think about it. David, I want to be conscious of your time and all these different things,
Yeah.
as we go forward, but just as we come to, our last few minutes here, just what are, like, and again, things that we missed and all that, but like when you're training mental performance, right? If we spend a few minutes just talking about training mental performance, developing mental toughness. One of my favorite quotes was from an episode with Tyler Nace, which actually was the most played episode of 2025. And it talks all about 2K performances, and it's an
Mm-hmm.
awesome. He's a monster. He's a really
Yeah.
high performer on the erg, even as someone long past his Olympic days. But he said
Yeah.
toughness is a muscle. You have to
Yeah.
train toughness, and I love that, and I use it all the time with my athletes. But you're someone who can bring kind of that more practical scientific approach to a lot of this, having being someone who studies this. What are things that we maybe missed over the last hour or so in regards to training mental toughness that coaches or athletes should be aware of and put into their daily practice or whatever it may be? Like, what are things that are really tangible, grabbable things that athletes can start to instill to help develop that mental resiliency that is required to be successful in our sport?
Yeah, I think one is, I mean, something that we already touched on is just having a realistic timeline of, where are you now and where do you want to be and how long is it going to take to get there? If you're right on the cusp of just pushing past, breaking 6 minutes, that's a very different point of view mentally than it is if you're just starting your brand new rower and you're trying to figure out what this sport is. So I think it's just having a realistic timeline for your development. But I think for kind of very hands-on things is looking for smaller chunks. So when we think about confidence or mental toughness being a muscle, I 100% agree with that quote, and that was a great interview. And again, it kind of comes back to strength training. We don't build muscle by going, 10 pounds and then we go to 50 pounds and then we go to 100 pounds. No, we go 10 pounds, then we maybe go to 15 pounds, and then 17 and a half pounds, and maybe we have to go back down to 15 pounds, then we jump to 20 pounds. But it's small incremental successes stacked over time. And that's really the most important thing. It's not these huge jumps. Yes, over the course of a season, you're probably going to see huge jumps, or at least I hope you do. But if we look at any one day or any one week or month, it's just these small, tiny achievements that are just stacked up, and you do enough of them, and hopefully you have more good days than you do bad days. That's where the real progress comes. And it comes from being able to just push yourself the extra 10 meters, or you show up to practice even when you don't want to show up to practice, and even on those days where you're just a little tired and all of that. It's trying to be able to not be okay with not making huge jumps, but just being having the expectation that improvement, whether it's mental or physical, comes small chunks at a time. And I think once you do that, it becomes much easier to accept where you're at, and becomes much less intimidating to be able to take the next step, because it's not saying you have to go and drop 10 seconds off your split tomorrow. It's more of, okay, well, let's just work on dropping a half a second off your split. And then you can do that. Okay, well, next week, now we can do a second. Or if you're struggling with the 2K, and you really break at, let's say, 1,200 meters, well, maybe you do a piece where you just try to push that same split to 1,300 meters. And then you prove to yourself you can do that extra 100 meters. And then the next time you do 1,350 or 1,400. So it's really just breaking it up, small chunks over time is what really is going to set the difference.
And it's like, and you don't want to shield yourself from it. It's like, kind of everything that you're
Yeah.
saying is like, you don't want to shield your, like, you want to, like, it happens on, consistent, marginal progress, but is only, it's like you have to be consistent with it and practicing
Yeah.
on, I think that's one, like, I think that's like one of the massive takeaways of, again, like, if all you're doing is trying to wait until test day, to kind of train these things, like, that's like doing push, trying to jump from, 185 to 225 on the bench just like that, but there's no training
Hmm.
of it in the middle, right? You try to
Right.
do this, right, one event once a month, but there's no training to kind of get that progress going, and then you go out. And so no, I think there's so much um, just I think there's so much value in this in an area that's very hard for people to grasp and understand, especially younger athletes or coaches who maybe, you know, haven't been in those situations in a long time. Last thing, and then I'll let you go. But just
Yeah.
um, this one thing I think about is this PR or bust mentality. I just referenced it before, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of high school rowers feel this need that if they don't PR, then this was a failure. This test was a failure. Their training is a failure. I am not like, again, we kind of talked about it with mental identity or with, you know, not attaching your identity to this, and progress, you know, comes in
Hmm.
very different or many different ways. But this PR or bust, if I don't see tangible improvement and like, talk about that for a minute and then we'll close things out.
Yeah. I think first we have to understand that improvement, whether it's physical or mental, is on an exponential curve. And by that, I mean, like, it starts out very steep. So you're going to see a lot of gains at first, and then it's going to flatten out, and it's going to be harder to get smaller gains. So you're going to have to work harder to get smaller gains. And so, especially with high school rowers, where you are developing like crazy, especially guys in high school, usually go through their growth spurt and puberty, and they're going to pack on muscle, and they're going to change, and those physiological changes over the course of a year or two, they might see a lot of PRs really quickly just because their bodies are changing. And then you're going to normalize and you're going to flatten that curve. And you're going to get into that mindset of, well, last year I was able to get a PR every time, and now I'm struggling just to get a second off or something. That's perfectly normal. And I think we have to normalize that not every 2K, not every erg test is going to be great. Not everyone's going to be a PR, and that's just how it is. And I think, again, starts with a coach. And we have to also start setting progress, not just on time. Yes, we have a goal time that we want to reach, but it may not be a PR time. And your PR might come at the end of the season. I mean, if you talk to people who are training for the Olympics, they aren't even thinking in, 1 year seasons. They're thinking in like a 4 year training cycle. And so they might be working to PR 3 years from now, and not just, later this month, because physiologically that's where they're at. So I think we have to see, where are we in our snapshot, in our development. And I think that's kind of on coaches a little bit to kind of help athletes understand what's expected of them based off of where they are in their training, where they expect them to be. So set those standards in a way that helps your athletes have a realistic perception of what they're capable of. But then for the athletes themselves, understanding that not everything's going to be linear. We talked about that already. It's going to be ups and downs, but hopefully, if you zoom out far enough, it kind of evens out to a upward line. But then also have other things that are success besides just time. So maybe you're working on your ability to like push through the third 500. That could be something. Maybe it's your technique. Maybe you're working on not collapsing. Maybe it's actually just maintaining a consistent split or dropping splits, each 500. There are so many other things than just your raw time that can be success in a 2K. And I, as a former coach, I would rather have my rowers, PR at the end of the season than PR in February and never reach that speed again because they burn themselves out. So it's kind of, what are your long-term goals? Your long-term goal should not be just to maximize your 2K time on the erg. No, that's a tool. So your long-term goal is to win whatever race you're going to have at the end of spring. That's your long-term goal. The 2K is just in service of that. And so even if you have a quote unquote bad score because it's not a PR, that's still adding to your fitness space. It's still teaching you something about how to push mentally. So 3 or 4 or 5 months from now, when you're sitting in, the final of whatever boat, you know how to push yourself. You have the fitness because you've been building it since January, February times.
Oh man, I love it. That was a
Yeah.
great place to close things out.
Yeah.
And again, I think just uh, like, even if you're a few seconds off your PR, but you executed it with perfection and you learned something about yourself and you handled it better in the third 500, and you did a lot of these different things and challenging yourself in different ways mentally, it's still a positive result and is going to contribute to that, cyclical but upward trajectory, with progress. So, David, to wrap things up for us, tell us a little bit about, some of the resources that you provide. Give people some, we'll put a link to the website. I was on there a little bit earlier today. Some amazing content on there. I follow you on social media. Some amazing content there. Give us a little understanding of what's cooking, where people can find you, and what you do to help rowers and coaches.
Exactly. Well, my primary goal, if you haven't picked up on it by now, is to really help rowers and coaches develop the mental training in the same way they do every other part of this sport. So I do try to make a lot of content available. If you go to my website, it's probably the best place to start. I have a lot of free resources there. Everything we've talked about, I have some sort of resource that's there. I have PDFs that are 30, 40, 50 pages long on the racing brain, on the training brain. There's infographics. There's tons of stuff. So if you are somebody who really wants to dig into there, please go check that out. I'm on Instagram too, getting much more active on there. So please follow there. I try to post both small video clips, stuff that, small quotes, things that you can really use depending on what time of year it is. LinkedIn, probably more for our coaches out there than the rowers, but I'm active there again, trying to connect with people, because really my whole goal is that I can, walk into a regatta, hopefully 5 years from now, and be hearing athletes and coaches that I've never talked to, I've never worked with, kind of talking about the mental side in these ways, using racing brain, training brain, whatever it is, because then I'll know it's starting to actually permeate within the culture of rowing, because we have so much going for us that I think if we just add this one component, you're going to see your rowers grow leaps and bounds. And I work with teams, I work with rowers, all that information's there on the website too. If that's of interest to you, please reach out. If you just have any questions, please reach out. Happy to help.
I love it. Such an underserved area of rowing coaching in a way that I think is not purposeful. It's just very complex. And you can't see it. Like you literally can't, it's tough to see. So I think the resources that you provide, right? Like I think that's where I tell people, like, train this stuff, like, even with the resources that you provide, like being able to get them actually see the why behind what happens in here. Like it's very easy to say, like, push through, like you got to learn how to handle it better, but to understand the why that you're presenting to people, I think is super valuable.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. David, it's great.
Yeah, no, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. We will definitely do a round 3 down the line. But again, I learned a ton. I'm sure many people did as well, but thank you so much. Good luck with everything that you have going on, and we'll be talking again soon, but thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin.